I heard you say you can tell a lot about somebody's psychological well-being by the way they handle conflict. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's real easy for you or me or anybody else to be friendly and coordinated and helpful when that other person happens to be exactly like I want them to be. Anybody can do that. And so when I am trying to ascertain where a person is in their personal or emotional sense of well-being, I'm not watching exactly how they do things when everything is smooth and keen.
Hmm.
But you'll really get a measure of where a person is by watching how they manage conflict, because that's when you have to draw upon the real maturity and the skill set that says, okay, we differ, things aren't going well, this could potentially come apart at the seams. And I want to see if we can turn this into something that's less than that, obviously, or maybe even we can turn it into a growth opportunity. So it's really interesting to see that. That's when you're going to know if the person in front of you has a sense of steadiness and stability. Watch how they manage people when they're not pleased or when other folks are just really different.
Right. And so how can, in the context of people who are toxic, I know one of the things you said is that sometimes, one of the manipulation tactics of toxic people is to use anger to manipulate people's emotions. How can somebody tell if that's being done to them versus somebody who just happens to be angry?
Well, let me kind of give you a little backdrop as a perspective on this. I'm 70 years old now, and way back when I finished my graduate training, I was a 26-year-old green person who thought I knew everything, but I didn't. And I had a supervisor in the place where I did my doctoral internship who had done a lot of concentration on anger management. And he handed a whole lot of notes to me and said, Les, run with it. You've got my blessing. Ross Bannister, what a great guy. And so in my early career, I began to put together anger workshops. And I had checklists and handouts, and it was a good way for a young therapist like me to kind of get my feet wet, etc. And as I would go through all of the different machinations of anger, I began realizing that it's in the person's moments of anger that you can see that are you going to be a conniver? Are you going to be somebody who's uber controlling? Are you going to be somebody that is a peacekeeper or somebody who's a bridge builder? And anger is one of the natural byproducts of individuals who are the connivers. Interestingly, Doug, the longer I did my workshops, and I did them for years, we would talk about issues like how angry people have problems with trying to control others, or they're super defensive and they're fear based, and they don't operate truthfully on so many different ways, and they have to have superiority. And as the years went by, it began to dawn on me, I'm talking about classic narcissism here. And so, to me, anger mismanagement is a natural outflow of the pattern of narcissism. And so it just all goes hand in hand. And highly toxic, like you say, narcissistic individuals are just, I mean, it's not a maybe, it's a guarantee. The net result waiting at the end of all of that is going to be they're going to have some real anger issues.
Talk about the different types of anger and the way that they're expressed. I think oftentimes people associate anger with yelling, screaming, even some violence, but that's not always the case. Anger can also show up as being passive aggressive, as somebody just completely shutting down to try and control a conversation. Talk about the different types of anger that people need to be aware of.
Okay. Well, let's back up on that one, and let's even go so far as to say exactly what is a person wishing to accomplish when they experience anger. And it's important for us to first and foremost understand anger as an emotion that taps into your need for self-preservation. Okay. So the angry individual is in a self-preserving mode. Something is going on in front of me that I don't like, or I disagree with, or it's bothersome. I need to take care of myself. And in a legitimate sense, you can say, well, that angry person is wishing to stand up for their worth as a human being. It's their way of saying, would you please treat me with some respect? Okay, I can buy that. Or they're trying to stand up for their basic needs. Hey, look, I've got needs. Can you please factor those in? Or third, they're trying to stand up for their core convictions. There's certain things that I believe in and I don't want to back down. And so that's the basis of what's going on inside of a person who's feeling angry. They're wanting to preserve worth, needs, and convictions. Okay, so that's the beginning point. But then, as you just mentioned, there are different ways that we go about managing that. Now, for example, some individuals, and these typically are the ones who have a hard time dealing with troublesome people. Some of them will just suppress. They just shut down. It's like, I don't want to talk. I don't want to reveal anything. It's going to get me in trouble. This is going to be nowhere good. And so what they do is they store up their anger. It's what I refer as the trash can effect. You put trash in the trash sack, and at the end of the day, it starts smelling. And then, when you hold on to your anger and suppress over time, it begins getting a smelly effect. Others, though, they decide, I want to stand up for my worth and my needs and my convictions. And you know what? I'm going to do it at your expense too. I don't care about you. And that's the openly aggressive person. That's the person that says, when you come against me, I'm going to make you pay, and it's going to hurt. And so these are the brash. And when we talk about toxic, they're the overtly toxic people, and harsh and mean spirited, name calling and yelling, and just like you said, they're the ones that give anger a really bad name. But then, like you just mentioned, we also have people that think, well, if I get too loud with my anger, then I expose myself to problems that I don't want to get into. So they go the passive route in expressing their anger. It's like, and we call that passive aggressive. And these are the people that when they're angry, they become deliberately non cooperative. And there can be all sorts of ways that can play out. The passive aggressive person is someone that lets it be known, if you want some sort of coordination with me, not going to happen. And so they can promise to do something and then not deliver. They can say whatever you want to hear at the time, and then later on it's like, I never said that. Or they can be lazy, or they can procrastinate, or they can become evasive and secretive. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that they go about that. And so there are different ways that people will go into their anger space and conflict resolution. And again, the way they do so reveals the extent or not of their psychological maturity.
And I know there's different types of narcissists. There's covert, which is more of like the hidden one, I think, and then there's,
Right.
is it overt? Is that the one that's more outgoing? Does the anger correlate to the type of narcissist a person is like somebody who is more passive aggressive and shuts down? Do they tend to be more covert? And is the opposite also true?
Yeah, in a general sense, yes. But we're not going to say 100% definitively, but yes, generally speaking. For example, you can have that overt narcissist, and when they get angry, they're in that self preservation mode. But their need for control and their condescension and attitude of superiority just cannot be contained, and they will let you know. And so the overt narcissist can be, they have a hard time shutting themselves down, and they can be very strongly belligerent. Now, sometimes though, when the overt narcissist has just completely, said everything they can do, and they've been as mean and harsh as they can, then they can still go into the passive aggressive mode. As an example, let's suppose that narcissistic person has screamed and yelled and laid a person to just put them in rubble, and then after a while, it's like, okay, I'm done, and then they won't talk to you for 2 weeks, or they'll just give you that cold, hard stare. Or when you say something to them, they just act as if you don't even exist, and that's the passive aggressive. So you can have obviously some overlay. The covert narcissist, they're more known for wanting to give an impression of having it together, And so the phoniness factor for them is stronger because they like to portray themselves as more approachable than they really are. And so, sure enough, those individuals would be the kind that would, when they're angry, it's like, I may not yell, but I'm not going to give you the time of day, and so, or I'm not going to cooperate, or I'll say whatever you want, but don't count on me. As far as I'm concerned, you're a nobody to me. And so they can be more subtle and below the radar. And so, but then there are times when they can get pushed, and then boom, they blow, and they go into that openly aggressive way, and then people are saying to themselves, "Where did that come from?" Because this seems so out of character. But it's really not, because they've been holding it for so long. So as a general rule, you'd have those distinctions, but each of them can be drawn out of their general propensity and go into other unhealthy ways because they just don't have an internal compass that's going to guide them towards the healthy path.
And well, from what I understand, a lot of what they're doing in situations like that is trying to maintain control and a power dynamic, right? And
Yes.
I think a lot of people, if either they're not familiar with that or maybe they're not good at regulating themselves, they fall victim to that and they kind of fall into the trap of the narcissist, right? Um, what should somebody do instead? Like, how can somebody take their power back when there's a narcissist that's trying to fight with them, argue with them, and use their anger in a manipulative way?
Well, that's a great question, Doug, because in fact, one of the things when I was in my therapy practice that I would coach people with is you can't afford yourself to, you can't afford to allow the narcissist to establish your pace. Because if they yell, then you yell. Or if they go down some real insulting ways, you become insulting, and in doing so, it's like, yeah, now I've turned into a hypocrite. I'm mad at a person for being this awful person, but I'm acting just like them, and I don't want to be that kind of person. And so, first, there just needs to be a delineation where that individual who's on the receiving end of this unruly anger, that person needs to say, those are choices. And that's the way that narcissistic individual is taking himself or herself. But I have choices too, and I choose not to go that path. And that's hard because when you're in conflict and anger and all, you tend to run with the mood of the moment. Sometimes you have to rehearse this well in advance. But the better choice, to get to your question, is assertive anger. You've heard us talk about, you need to learn how to be assertive, and there's some people that have a very wrong understanding of what assertive means. So I think some people think that if you're assertive, you can just say whatever you want to say, and if others don't like it, that's just tough. And it's like, no, that sounds like aggressive to me. Assertive anger means I'm going to stand up for who I am. I'm going to stand up for my worth and my needs and my convictions, but I'm going to do it with a certain amount of civility. I know that I want to be treated respectfully when somebody is frustrated with me, and even whether they are or not, I want to at least offer what I would prefer to be offered to me. And so, notice your tone of voice. You can say things with firmness and with conviction, but you don't have to insult them along the way, and you don't have to be harsh and mean spirited. And you don't have to ramble and go on and on and on. And so that's the better distinction. And then there's a whole other topic we can get into as well, and that is eventually you get to the point where you appeal to higher priorities. It's like, I don't want to stay angry for the rest of the day, or I don't want to just have this experience of conflict to go on and on. I've got other things I want to do with my psychological self, like be patient or accept an ugly truth or move on to something else. And so the healthy individual realizes choice is always in the middle of our anger and our conflict resolution patterns. What choices will I make that will differentiate me in a healthy way from that toxic, narcissistic controller?
So can we use like a real life example to put things into perspective for people so that way they kind of can have an idea of what this all looks like?
Well, I'll give you a great illustration. I talked to this fellow not that long ago, and he's middle aged, let's say in his early 50s. And he has a father who's roughly around 80 years old. And this younger man would say, whenever I'm around my father, we have to be so careful not to step on these little landmines, if you will. You know, if you talk about the wrong topic, or you use the wrong tone of voice, or if you express an opinion that is just not what he wants, then out of nowhere he can just go off. And he can just say, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," or "Where did you come up with something like that?" or "Nobody's going to come into my house," that kind of guy. And this younger guy was talking to me, and he said, it used to be that I would get so triggered that whenever he would treat me in that disdainful way, I started yelling back at him. And he said that goes all the way back to when I was a teenager. And I would say stuff like, "Well, I hate you, and why would I ever want to listen to you?" And it continued off and on in a more muffled kind of way in his 20s and 30s and 40s. And he said, and this is a guy that was finally coming in to do something about it. It's like, his blood runs through me. His DNA is in my body, and I have the propensity to be like him, and that scares me to death. And so we started started exploring. Well, when your dad goes off, what are your options? And let's put all the options on the table. You can scream. You can tell him he's an idiot. You can tell him he's ruined your life. You can say that he doesn't know what he's talking about, or nobody like. You can say all that kind of stuff. Then the question is, how's that going to work? And of course, the answer is, well, all it does is it just riles him up, and I go home and I'm in a worse mood than I ever was. Well, what are your other options? We came with what I refer to as to a concept that I call calm firmness. And when we use calm firmness, I can say something like, "Dad, I know that that's very important to you, but it's just not a topic I want to get into." Or when he says, "You're nobody with a half a brain would think the way you think," then my calm, firm response could be something like, "Well, that's an interesting perspective, but it's one that I don't share with you, Dad." And when you have that calmness and you stand firmly, or if he says, "Well, I just think these people are a bunch of idiots, and they don't have it, they shouldn't be making decisions about anything," and you might say something like, "I'd like to show respect to those people. You call them idiots. I call them people who just differ from me. So we differ on that one too, Dad." And so we started just going through all sorts of scenarios where he used to get triggered, and he felt empowered. In other words, you mean to tell me I get to choose who I'm going to be, and I don't have to be reactive and harsh and condescending like him? And I said, "Well, yeah, that we have a word for that. It's called maturation. The more you mature, the more you realize he's acting like an 8-year-old kid out on the playground, that bully, and he's 80 years old. And I don't want to be the fellow 8-year-old kid who kicks him in the shins when he kicks me in the shins. I'm not going to be that way." And so when you talk with individuals about that, there can actually be a great sense of delight, not in the sense that you have to deal with it, but in the sense it says, "I get to claim a much healthier version of me. What does that look like? And give me an opportunity, and I think I can pull it off."
Right. And how do you, I guess, not just convince somebody, but maybe like, I mean, I don't even know if inspire is the right word, to react in the way that you're talking about, versus I think people's knee-jerk reactions in times like that when somebody is mistreating them for no reason is to be defensive, attack them back, maybe like slip in a name or something. Um, how do you get people to understand that it's not personal?
Um, that's a really good question. First, um, you want to remind yourself, if I am not the individual in the room with that person, we'll go back to that guy with that dad. Is Dad going to suddenly become angelic
Mm-hmm.
and pleasant? It's like, no, he's going to be the way he is, no matter who happens to be in front of him. And you remind yourself, I just happen to be the player on the stage, and this is not about me. This is about him. But to your point, intellectually we can say that, but down at the gut level, that's really hard. You want to think, but I'm that person's son or daughter, or this is my spouse, or this is somebody that I've worked with for a good period of time, and they don't need to treat me this way. And I just say, take the me out of it, and just generically say, they don't need to treat people that way, me included. But I mean, you're nowhere near the first, and you'll be nowhere near the last who's going to be the recipient. And so you have to remind yourself, this person carries this toxicity because they have not examined themselves strongly enough to figure out what their better alternatives are, and they want to try to make it all about me. But I'm not. And inevitably, when you look at that individual, you can look at a long, long list of people that they've insulted and managed poorly and all. And so it's necessary to have that differentiation.
Right. And let's talk about the other side of the coin. I know you've touched on it already, but the person who, what do they call it? Like, I guess stonewalling, the cold shoulder. I
Yeah,
guess it
yeah,
used to be called. Now, I guess in the more modern, like therapeutic term, I've heard it called stonewalling, where somebody will just shut down to try to control a conversation. And I think, if you're like living with that person, they're a family member, you're in a relationship with them, you're in friendship with them, that can be incredibly like awkward.
yeah.
Um, how do you handle the silent treatment when somebody is, I guess, unjustly angry with you?
Yeah, and by the way, John Gottman is the one that kind of brought that word stonewalling to the forefront. Are you familiar with his work?
Yeah, I love their work.
He's a pioneer, and I've not met him, but I know people who've known him. But he came up with four things that people do in the middle of conflicts that show that the relationship is about to come to an end. Criticism, let's see, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And when people are willing to go into that space, then they're indicating that they're so sour and all that. They just don't want to make any good choices. They don't care. They've lost any kind of optimism. But the stonewalling person, they have so drawn the conclusion that you're such a nobody to me. You don't even warrant me looking at you. Or yeah, if you ask me a question, I'm not even going to respond. Or if I know you need my presence at a certain event or in a certain task, um, I have no willingness, no desire to even accompany you. And I mean, it can be cold. And of course, I tell folks all the time, there's no such thing as no communication.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be saying a single word, but boy, are they communicating. And we tend to take it on a personal level. It's like they're saying, "I hate you," or "I think you are a loser." And again, we have to remind ourselves, they hate because they hate. That they want you to think, "I hate because it's you." No, you just hate because it's in you to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Or they call you a loser, not because you're a loser, but they call you a loser because, frankly, there's a ton of projection going on there. I feel inept to manage life's problems, but rather than, which is why they're screaming and going to the stone wall and all of that. But rather than admitting that, I'm just going to say, no, you're a loser. You don't know anything about life. And in fact, no, you got that one wrong too. And so the more you can have this objectivity about who they are and where they're coming from, and then what that means to you, then hopefully, fingers crossed, you can bring a sense of objectivity to the equation, and remind yourself, I'm in the presence of an underdeveloped adult. This is somebody who's fixated literally in pre-adolescent thinking, and they have not grown. So, and I don't say that in any kind of insulting way. It's just simply fact. This is the way little bitty children act when they throw a temper tantrum, or when they don't get their way, or when they go off and pout. And it's like, okay, I got it. And you remind yourself it's about them. It's sure isn't about me.
Right. And like, how can somebody like get comfortable like with the uncomfortable, like if they're like just sitting with them for like a long period of time?
Well, um, I don't know that we need to make discomfort go away. How do I feel okay? Well, I don't. How do you feel comfortable? Well, this is pretty awkward. It's kind of like if you walk into a room and it's got, stale food that's been there for several days, it smells bad. Well, how can I make myself not think that it smells bad? It does. And so when you say how do you not feel uncomfortable? It's like, well, I am going to feel uncomfortable. In other words, allow yourself permission to say, this sucks. This isn't any good. But having said that, I can remove myself from that room with smelly food. In the same way, I can remove myself from the presence of somebody who's going to bring me this quiet disdain and contempt and all the rest. And at some point, it's like, I am not so beholden to this person that I require me to remain in the presence of this person. Whether it means that you go take a 15-minute walk or whether it means that you get out of their life and never see them again. And
Hmm.
there's a whole lot of options somewhere in between too. But at some point, it's like, if this is the way that individual is going to be, then the consequence for them treating me this way is they get to have me not in their presence. I'm not gonna participate.
And is there like anything? I mean, and I think what happens is people will, especially if somebody's being like super, if somebody's being super cold to somebody, I think what happens is the person will try and just poke and poke and poke, trying to get them to talk.
Oh yeah,
Bad approach.
uh, terrible, terrible approach. You know what? Because it's like trying to tug on the rope with a donkey. Um, I mean, literally, that donkey they just get that much more resistant. And because keep in mind that stonewalling itself, and you alluded to it, is a power move. It's their
Right.
way of saying, I'm going to show you who's in charge around here, and it's not you. And so when you say, please quit doing this way or being this way, or come on, we can do better than this, they're over there thinking, it's working.
Mm.
I'm getting what I want. You're about to fall apart, aren't you? And I'm gonna then come and say, see, why would I want to try to engage with somebody who's as moronic as you? And so they win. And so my thinking is, okay, declare yourself the winner. I don't care because I'm not in the game. I'm not going to do that, and it requires you to have your own sense of well-being, separate and distinct from that person, as opposed to being in this codependent trap where you think, no, I've got to have their approval so that I can be okay with myself because that's the way they're feeling in reverse. It's like, no, I see it for what it is, and I don't feel the need to play that game.
Right. Because at the end of the day, it's like if you give in to what that person is doing and you get all riled up and you begin to question yourself, essentially they're going to keep doing that because they've seen now that, oh, this is clearly working and I can
Let me give
manipulate.
you a real simple little illustration. I have a little 6-year-old granddaughter. And one of the things that I learned was that because she likes to go with pops and go to different things, and so I had to run into the grocery store, and 2 or 3 different times we've been in there. I'll have to tell her before we go in the store. Now we're only going to get a couple of things, and please don't ask me about buying stuff that we don't need to have. And sometimes she just can't stop herself. Well, I want this, pops, and can I have that? No, we only came for these things. Well, one particular time we were in there, and we were at the checkout place, and at the checkout counter they have these little small refrigerators with energy drinks and stuff like that. And she said, "Well, pops, I'm thirsty, and I need something to drink." And I said, "Well, we're going to be home in 10 minutes. We'll get you something there." And she started crying. And then I just said, "Well, honey, remember we talked about this coming into the store. We're not going to do that. We're gonna get on home, and you'll get something to drink there." And she kept on crying, and the cashier was kind of looking at me like, "Sorry about that, sir." Well, by the time we got to the house, she realized, well, that didn't work. That didn't go too well. And all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, we're best friends all over again. Now, see, with a little 6-year-old kid, it's like, well, that doesn't shock me that sometimes you try to push and find out what the edges are and what the boundaries are. And so you just learn how to have confidence. I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to take care of you. We're going someplace good. But when that person's 56 or 72 or 38 or whatever, it's like, you're not a 6-year-old kid anymore.
Right.
And so that's when you want to plead with them and say, grow up or be different. And that's where we go back and say, well, I'm going to remind myself this person is in fixated pre-adolescent development, and they have not grown up. They haven't grown past that 6-year-old stage where the kid's going to throw a tantrum. And so all I can do is just be comfortable with who I am and confident that I'm making a good decision. I don't necessarily feel comfortable, but it's like, no, I know me well enough to know that my heart is right. And that's hard, but it's
Right.
necessary.
You mentioned the word tantrum. I mean, I've often read online and even watching, content that, I think narcissists will also like cry as a way of manipulating you as well. Like talk about that, because I think it's tough, because at first you're like, I mean, I think people are like how is this person like forcing themselves to cry? And also I think it's so challenging, because I think I would say, like, unless you're a sociopath, like when somebody starts to cry, you can do nothing. You want to do nothing but have compassion for them and give them a hug. How can people handle things like that and other forms of manipulation?
Well, and this is why guys like me and you, we put these videos out because we need to understand what's going on there. If a person is entrapped or ensnared by their own narcissistic tendencies, one of the defining features of narcissism is entitlement. These individuals think, well, I deserve special treatment. And whatever rules apply to everybody else don't apply to me. And so you need to defer to me. You need to conform. And so they have a fixed agenda as to how they're supposed to be treated based on that entitlement plus other things. And then when you come along and say, well, I don't want to enable an inappropriate attitude of entitlement, then they're crying, if that's their mode, because they actually believe, no, I'm entitled. And they claim the victim status. Now, they don't say that out loud, but that's what's going on. You're victimizing me. You're making my life miserable. I don't know what to do. And in their tears and in their protest and anger, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to handle life. I'm inept, I'm desperate. I've got to have you to live correctly for me, so that I can finally be a stable person. And you're not giving me what I want. And if I'm that healthy individual watching this person decompose like that, I'm thinking, well, bless your heart. There's certain lessons when you were that 6-year-old kid and 8 years old and all that you just didn't learn, you didn't pick up on. And I'm sorry, but that's not my problem. I mean, you're trying to make it my problem. But that individual is, they actually do believe, no, I deserve that special treatment. And it's like, well, then you got it wrong. And so yeah, it's so essential to have objectivity to counteract their subjective pull on you.
But when somebody's doing something like crying, like how do you know? Like how can somebody spot the difference between somebody who's like legitimately crying because they're actually like really upset,
Yeah.
or they're doing it with bad intentions?
Well, I just use the word I deserve. And, we each deserve a certain amount of dignity and respect, etc. But the narcissistic person is so needy. For example, let's say for example, I spoke not that long ago with a woman who was talking about a brother who had taken his life. And then she was talking about it in the context of how he had a very difficult relationship with his own father and then with his wife, and he finally decided this isn't worth it. And as she was talking with me, she teared up. And it's like, this is such a tragedy, and I miss him, and there are so many good things about him that just got squashed and all, and it's like, that's legitimate. When you cry at something like that, there's a grief and there's a sense of emptiness that can come there, but you'll notice that it's devoid of entitlement. And so that's where I make my delineation. There's no exploitation that's there, like I'm trying to get something out of you. But there can be a legitimate sadness that can be there, and it can be on small things too. My child had a really bad day at school, and I can be talking to my spouse about that, and I get choked up because I care so much about my child, and that kid's being exposed to bullying, and it can cause you to be choked up. There are times when you have that kind of experience where you want to weep, but it's not there's not a demand that's associated with that. That. At least for me, the exploitation, the entitlement, and all that's where I make my delineation point.
And maybe is there a difference, like if you're like mid argument with somebody and they start crying? Is that a telltale sign that it's being faked?
Oh, there's a good chance of it, yeah. Particularly if it's an argument, because at that point, I'm gonna kind of equate that to the person saying, "I'm not getting my way,"
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, "I feel sad." And I grieve the loss of our connection. I don't think that's what they're getting at. So yeah, when they cry right in the middle of an argument, uh, there's an extremely high probability. It's like, yeah, I'm not getting my way. Now, let me be careful. There are some people who have been on the receiving end of abuse so frequently that it can turn on the tears when it comes again. But I don't see that in the same vein as what I just described. When
Right.
you've been abused over and over, and then here it comes again, and you have this weariness about you. That's a different story. So let's be careful that we don't just have hard stereotypes about tears and things like that.
Right. Any other emotional manipulation tactics you think that narcissists use?
Well, the I did a video not that long ago about the ultimate goal of a narcissist, and their ultimate goal is they just want to empty you of you. Whatever's distinct about you or unique, they can just say, "Well, you're stupid" or "You're no good." I mean that's they so they're so self impressed that it's like, well, what you need is more of what I have to offer. You need to have my opinions, my preferences, my priorities, my beliefs, and my habits. And if you don't, then what's wrong with you? And so, and they're so full of themselves. So you're going to get a lot of invalidation. For example, if you try to say, "Well, here's my reasoning," or "This is what I want you to understand," then in their effort to try to empty you of you, they'll say, "Well, no, that's not good. Let's throw that out. What else you got?" And there's this constant invalidation. And then another of the tactics that they'll use is they'll throw their wall up, and this kind of goes back to their the stonewalling, but they're more open about it. There's a harsh defensiveness. You can't tell me anything, or you don't know what you're talking about, and so they can go into that strong kind of mindset. And that's many of the angry narcissists are defensive off the charts. That they won't listen to anyone, and that conveys exactly how self-impressed they are, falsely so, I might add. So yeah, they've got all sorts of tricks up their sleeve.
And any general advice for people to, I mean, just to be able to be proactive to avoid falling into the trap that so many people fall into?
Yeah, and one of the questions I like to ask people in my therapy office, I would say, give me an idea of the kind. Give me several words, adjectives of characteristics that you would like to have be most predominant in your personality. And so they might say something like, "Well, I guess I need to be more patient, or maybe understanding and respect." So they'll give me two or three like that. It's like, okay, let's keep going. Let's come up with about 20. And then I just make them just break it down. Let's talk about what other kind of characteristics. Well, honesty and peace or contentment or firmness or all sorts of different things. And then the idea is I want you to have a very thorough definition of you. And then the next question is now that you've delineated what you and this isn't just a quick and easy kind of thing, it's part of a process, but let's talk about some of the common circumstances in which you're least inclined to be that person you just described. And so that's where we say, okay, you have a definition of yourself, and then you have this person over here, this set of circumstances over here that are going to take you outside of who you are. And in other words, the narcissist wants to squash your real self. In what ways might you claim and maintain your definition of yourself, knowing full well that there are others who are working against that? And so it's necessary to go through those kinds of exercises and defining features, and it's kind of a rehearsal in advance. And people that have that analytical thinking, it's like, oh, good, I've got something I can hold on to the next time that narcissistic person is going to bring their toxicity. I'm not required to allow them to establish who I am, because I've already established who I want to be, and I make sense. And it can be an ongoing process. So, I mean, it comes down to self-reflection, self-awareness, understanding of who they are, being proactive about who you want to be. It sounds easy when good old Les Carter describes it like this, but it literally takes a lifetime to get really good at it.
Well, Les, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Really enjoyed this, and I really loved how we went deep into like this one topic. I think the
Yeah.
audience is going to get a lot of value.
Well, Doug, I so appreciate what you're doing with your work, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
You got it, my friend. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.